Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive, where we unpack some seriously useful tips on learning English quickly.
We're digging into an episode from the Speak Smart podcast with Sophia and James.
They're so energetic, it's infectious.
Right. It makes you want to grab a notebook and start learning right alongside them. And they do a great job of breaking down kind of overwhelming language learning concepts into stuff you can actually use.
So like what? What are some of the big things that jumped out at you?
Well, they emphasize a few keywords right off the bat, like practice and routine, focus, goals, motivation.
Okay, standard stuff, but important reminders for sure.
Totally. But then they even say mistakes.
Mistakes.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people are scared of making mistakes when they're learning a new language.
Exactly. And that's what I loved about their approach. They actually see mistakes as like valuable feedback.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Like little opportunities to learn and grow. They use this analogy of brushing your teeth.
Yeah.
You don't stress about doing it perfectly, right? You just make it a regular habit.
That's a good point. So building that routine is essential.
Yeah.
Do they get into specifics about how to actually make that happen?
They did. They talk about setting small, doable goals. Like instead of saying, I'm going to be fluent in a month, maybe today's goal is just to learn 5 new words.
Right. Small wins to keep you going.
Yeah.
What about motivation? Any tips for staying focused when it's so easy to just like scroll through social media all day?
This tip was so simple, I almost laughed, but it's so true. They said, turn off your phone.
Honestly, that's probably the best advice ever. Okay, so we've got the big picture, but what about the actual skills? Do they talk about listening, speaking, reading, and writing?
Absolutely. They had some super practical tips for each one.
Yeah.
Starting with listening, they emphasized how important it is to just let yourself absorb the natural flow of English.
So it's not just about understanding individual words, but how they all fit together.
Right. And they suggested tons of ways to practice listening to podcasts, watching videos, even just listening to music. Sophia actually mentioned that she loves listening to Imagine by John Lennon. She said something about loving the simplicity of the lyrics.
Oh, that's a great idea. It's amazing how much you can pick up passively just by listening to stuff you enjoy. Did they talk about any strategies to use while you're listening? Sometimes I catch myself zoning out.
Oh yeah, they had this great tip. They said to try repeating phrases out loud as you're listening.
So you're actively engaging with what you're hearing, not just letting it wash over you.
Exactly. It helps with pronunciation too. So that's listening. Speaking is probably the one that freaks people out the most. Did they have any advice for overcoming that fear?
I'm all ears because speaking is definitely my biggest hurdle.
Well, it all goes back to their whole philosophy of embracing mistakes. They really encourage you to just speak even if you mess up.
Easier said than done.
Yeah.
Were there any specific techniques they recommended?
One that stood out was something called shadowing.
Shadowing. What's that?
It's basically like you're echoing someone else's speech. You listen to them talk and then try to imitate them in real time.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're not just listening, but actively trying to reproduce the sounds.
Exactly. It's supposed to help you internalize those natural speaking rhythms. Okay, moving on to reading. Any tips for tackling English texts?
I always struggle with knowing where to start.
They said to start with material you actually enjoy, and that's not too difficult. Children's books, short stories, even comics.
It's got to be challenging enough to keep you engaged, but not so hard that you want to give up.
Right. And they had a classic tip. Keep a notebook handy to jot down new words. Writing things down really does help you remember them.
I've heard that one before, but it's true. And I bet they mentioned subtitles.
Of course, they're a great way to connect the spoken word with the written word. You can watch movies or shows with English subtitles to kind of reinforce your vocabulary.
Makes sense. Okay, last but not least, writing. What were their thoughts on developing those skills?
Again, they said to start simple, just like with reading. Keeping a diary in English can be a great way to practice without worrying too much about grammar rules.
It's about getting those thoughts down on paper without overthinking it.
Yeah. They also talked about reviewing your writing, checking for errors, maybe asking a friend for feedback, or using online tools.
So continuous improvement.
Yeah.
Did they mention anything beyond just journaling, like how to get more real-world writing experience?
They did. They suggested doing things like writing comments online, writing reviews, just little things here and there to practice.
So it's not just about writing essays, it's about finding ways to integrate writing into your daily life.
I love that.
Me too. And that actually leads perfectly into their next point, which is all about going beyond traditional skills and really immersing yourself in English.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's dive into those strategies after a quick break.
All right, so we're back and ready to hear about these creative immersion strategies. What are we talking about here?
Okay, get this. They suggest labeling things around your house.
Labeling. Like with little sticky notes.
Exactly, like door, window, table, just basic words, but seeing them all the time really reinforces them.
That's kind of cool.
No.
I like that. Change your everyday environment to a learning opportunity.
Right, like you're constantly surrounded by little reminders. They did say to start small, though.
Yeah.
Like maybe just label one room at a time so it doesn't feel too overwhelming.
Yeah, you don't want your whole house to feel like a vocabulary list.
Yeah.
What else did they suggest?
This one was great. They said to change the language settings on your phone and computer to English.
Oh, smart. I never thought of that.
It's such a simple tweak, but it exposes you to so much vocabulary. All those words you see every day, like settings, notifications, messages. You start thinking about them in English without even realizing it.
It's like a subtle form of brainwashing. We wouldn't do that right after this. I bet they're big fans of language learning apps too, right?
Definitely. They think apps are great for supplementing your learning. They even gave a shout out to some popular ones like Duolingo and Memrise.
Oh yeah, I've used those. They're fun.
Right. They make it feel like a game, and they're super convenient. You can use them anywhere, anytime.
Did they have anything to say about using apps too much? I could see myself getting sucked in.
They did, actually. They warned against relying on them exclusively. They said apps are awesome for vocabulary and grammar, but they can't replace real-world interaction.
Makes sense. So how do they suggest getting that real-world exposure if you're not actually living in an English-speaking country?
Well, they talked about connecting with English online, like joining forums, commenting on videos, even just writing reviews, all in English.
So good idea. That way you're getting real practice. Yeah. What about social media? I feel like I learn new slang all the time just from scrolling through my feed.
They mentioned that too. They're all for following accounts that post in English news outlets, bloggers, even meme accounts. It's all about surrounding yourself with the language.
It's amazing how much you can pick up passively like that. But I guess it's important to be careful about the kind of English you're exposed to on social media, right?
Yeah, they did caution against that. They said to be mindful that social media language can be super informal and sometimes even straight up wrong. So don't take everything you see as gospel.
Good point. I really liked how they emphasized connecting English to your passions. That seems like a great way to stay motivated.
Totally. One of the hosts, Sophia, talked about how much she loves cooking. And she makes a point of incorporating English into her kitchen routine, like reading recipes and watching cooking shows in English.
That's a really cool idea. So if someone's into photography, for example, they could read photography blogs in English or watch tutorials.
Exactly. And Sophia and James said to take it a step further, like if you're a gamer, try playing online games with English-speaking players.
Oh, that's such a fun way to practice. Did they talk about traveling to English-speaking countries at all?
They did. They said it's an incredible opportunity if you can swing it. But they also acknowledge that it's not realistic for everyone.
So what about those of us who can't just jet off to London? What did they suggest?
They recommended looking into online language exchange programs. You can connect with people from all over the world and practice your English while learning about their culture.
That's a great idea. It's like virtual traveling.
Yeah.
Even without directly interacting with others, though, there are still so many ways to immerse yourself, right?
Right. They talked about micro-learning. Like, remember that tip about learning one new word or phrase each day? Well, they suggest actively trying to use that word or phrase throughout the day.
So it's not just about memorizing it, but actually putting it into practice. Did they mention any specific techniques for doing that?
They're big fans of flashcards. You can make your own or use apps like Anki. They also emphasize learning phrases and expressions rather than just isolated words.
So like instead of just learning the word take, you might learn take a break or take a chance.
Exactly. It gives those words more context and helps you sound more natural. And of course, they circled back to their core message. Embrace those mistakes. Everyone's English is a work in progress, they said.
That's reassuring to hear.
Yeah.
It takes the pressure off a bit. But what about those times when you feel stuck? You're not making progress. Did they offer any advice for staying motivated?
They did, and I loved their approach. They start by asking, why are you learning English? What's your driving force?
That's such a good question. It makes you really think about your goals.
Right. And they suggest writing down your why and keeping it somewhere visible, like a little reminder on those tough days.
So you're connecting your efforts to something bigger than just memorizing grammar rules.
Exactly. They also said it's important to celebrate those small victories along the way. Like if you can now hold a basic conversation or understand a movie without subtitles, that's huge.
It's easy to get caught up in what you don't know, but it's so important to acknowledge how far you've come. Do they have any other tips for staying motivated?
They're big believers in finding a community, like an online forum or a local group of English learners. Sharing your experiences with others who get it can make a world of difference.
It's like having a support system to cheer you on. This is all such great advice. What a fantastic episode.
Seriously, they covered so much ground. It's inspiring to see how passionate they are about helping people learn English.
I'm feeling pumped to put some of these strategies into practice myself. But before we wrap up, did they talk at all about mindset? Like how to approach language learning with the right attitude?
They really do, and it's so refreshing to hear their perspective. Like, it's okay to not be perfect.
Right. It's all about enjoying the process and celebrating those little wins along the way.
Absolutely. They really emphasize that there's no one right way to learn. It's all about finding what works for you and just going for it.
Exactly. And then one of the biggest things they stressed was consistency. They said even just a few minutes each day can make a huge difference.
It's like that old saying, slow and steady wins the race, right?
Totally. And they talked about something that really resonated with me. Self-compassion. Like, it's okay to have days when you feel frustrated or like you're not getting anywhere. It's so important to be kind to yourself. Did they give any advice for dealing with those tough days?
Yeah. They said to just take a break, maybe do something you enjoy, and come back to it later with fresh eyes.
That's good advice. Sometimes you just need to step away for a bit.
They also reminded us that learning a language is a marathon, not a sprint.
I love that. It's not about cramming everything in at once. It's about finding a pace you can sustain.
And they said to remember to celebrate those little victories along the way, like having a successful conversation in English or understanding a movie without subtitles.
It's those little wins that keep you motivated.
Exactly. And their final message was so beautiful. They reminded us that learning English is about so much more than just acquiring knowledge. It's about connecting with new people, experiencing new cultures, and expanding your horizons.
That's such a great way to put it. This whole deep dive has been so insightful.
It really has. Sophia and James have such a positive and encouraging approach to language learning, and I think it's something we can all learn from.
Definitely. So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final question from Sophia and James. What small change can you make today to increase your exposure to English? Maybe it's listening to an English song, watching a short video, or even just thinking a few thoughts in English. Every little bit counts. And remember, learning English should be fun and rewarding. Embrace the journey, enjoy the process, and celebrate those milestones along the way. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.